Snow stung her face like glass, sharp and merciless. Shandian Yazi stumbled to her knees at the crossroads, her legs too numb to rise again. Wind howled through the pine trees like something alive curling around her, and the bundled infant pressed to her chest. Ashki hadn't made a sound in hours. That silence terrified her more than the cold. Her fingers shook as she peeled back the corner of the woven blanket, barely able to see the baby's face in the dimming light. Ashki's lips were pale, her tiny lashes dusted with frost. Shandian bent low, her cracked lips whispering against her daughter's cheek, trying to share what little warmth her trembling body still held. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I tried." She had walked 40 miles in 2 days. 3 towns had turned her away, each one quicker and crueler than the last. In Benson, they'd called her cursed. In Fort Defiance, they'd said they had no place for widows with bad luck trailing behind them. And in Cottonwood, the sheriff hadn't even let her finish a sentence before leveling a shotgun at her and the child on her hip. She'd kept walking, not because she believed there was a place left for her, but because her baby needed to believe it. Now, at the meeting point of 4 dusty trails, north to more rejection, east to righteous cruelty, south to men with cold offers, and west into the unknown wilderness, there was nowhere left. She sank into the snow, her back pressing against a cracked wooden post where the trails split. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, low and stern, "Keep walking, daughter. The land watches, the land remembers." But the land hadn't given her anything but silence and pain. Ashki whimpered faintly, the sound like wind through dry grass. Shandin tightened the blanket and tried to cry, but there were no tears left. Her vision blurred. Snow danced in her lashes, curling over her boots, building a shroud. She closed her eyes. If this was the end, let it be quiet. A distant sound broke the hush, hoofbeats steady and deliberate. Shandian's eyes snapped open. Her breath caught. A rider approached from the east. Dark coat, broad shoulders, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. The horse moved with the kind of grace that came from miles and discipline. Whoever he was, he hadn't come by accident. Panic clawed at her chest. She tried to stand, but her legs refused. She curled herself tighter around Ashki, ready to plead, ready to fight, ready to be invisible if it came to that. The rider slowed as he neared. 10 feet away, he stopped. He did not dismount. Shandan raised her chin and met his eyes. Gray. Cold. He didn't look surprised to find her half buried in snow. "Help me," she rasped. "My baby, she's cold." He said nothing for a moment. Then, in a voice rough as tree bark, he said, "I know what she needs. Question is, what are you willing to do for it?" Her heart sank. She knew that voice. Not his, but the tone. She'd heard it behind wagons, outside barn doors, in alleyways between towns where men offered shelter, with their eyes already undressing her. "I won't," she said, a mouth-dry voice cracked. "Not that, I won't." The man didn't move. "Didn't ask you to." Then without warning, he swung down from the saddle. He was tall, taller than any man she'd met, with shoulders like a timber beam. A jagged scar cut through his left brow, but his expression wasn't cruel. Just tired. Worn out. He stepped closer and she smelled wood smoke and wet leather. "I asked what you're willing to do," he said. "Work, clean, stay quiet, follow rules." Her teeth chattered. "You want a servant? I want someone who won't run, someone the town won't scare off, someone who needs a roof bad enough to ignore what they've heard about me." She stared. "What have they heard? That I'm cursed?" He shrugged, eyes on the snow behind her. "That I kill everything I touch." For a moment the wind was the only sound between them. "They say that about me too," she whispered. "That I killed my husband. That my baby's cursed, like her mother." He looked at her then. really looked. She saw no judgment, no curiosity, only recognition. As if he understood something she hadn't said. Then we understand each other. He extended his hand. It was large, calloused, cracked from work and weather. She hesitated. "What's your name?" she asked. "Thomas Nez. I'm Shandin Yazi. Can you ride Shandin Yazi? I'll try." "That's all I'm asking." He pulled her gently to her feet. Her legs gave way. Thomas caught her around the waist. His arm was solid, steady. For the first time in weeks, she felt heat, his body radiating warmth like the earth after rain. He lifted her onto the horse with practiced ease, then passed Ashki up, settling the baby between them. He climbed up behind her, his chest against her back, arms around both of them. "How far?" she asked. "Far enough," he said. "Somewhere the past can't find you." He turned the horse toward the west, where pine trees swallowed the trail and the sun sank like an ember. "Hold on," he murmured, and she did. The wind picked up. Snow began to fall again, faster now, angrier. Visibility vanished in sheets of white. Ashki stirred between them. Shandin felt her daughter's small breath against her fingers and held on tighter. "We won't make it to the ranch in this," Thomas said into her ear. "There's a line shack an hour west. We shelter there." She nodded against his coat. "I don't trust anyone." Smart woman. The snow turned blinding. The horse pressed forward. Shandin closed her eyes and whispered a prayer in Dine Bizad, the language of her mother and her mother's mother. The wind didn't answer. But the man behind her didn't let go. The door groaned as Thomas shoved it open, with his shoulder snow slamming in behind them. The shack was nothing more than a square of logs, nailed together with a rusted stove in the corner, and one cot built into the wall. It smelled of ash, dry wood, and old tobacco. But to Shandin, it felt like sanctuary. Thomas turned and kicked the door shut with his boot, then slid the bolt home. Ashki whimpered beneath her layers. Shandin was already pulling the blanket tighter around her, the tips of her fingers aching from the cold. "There's wood," Thomas said, already moving toward the small stack beside the stove. "Dry enough. Fire in 5 minutes." He worked without wasting words. Flint struck steel. Sparks caught on a bed of dry moss, and within moments flame crackled into life. The orange light flickered across his face, painting him in shadows. Shandin sat cross-legged on the cot, unwrapping Ashki, slowly murmuring the whole time. The baby's face was flushed now, warmth creeping back into her cheeks, and her eyelids fluttered. "She's okay," Shandin whispered. "She's a fighter." Tomas glanced back once. "She takes after her mother." Shandin didn't answer. She watched him pull off his coat, the dark wool heavy with ice and snow, revealing a shirt stained with old leather oil and faint trails of ash. His movements were tired, like he carried something heavier than she could see. When the fire began to grow steady, Thomas pulled a kettle from a crate, filled it with snow, and set it atop the stove. "It'll melt down soon. Then I'll make tea. You eat first." He nudged a can from his saddlebag toward her. "Venison and beans. Ain't much, but it's warm." She took the can and stared at it for a moment, then looked up. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't look at her. "Just said you didn't flinch when I said my name. That's supposed to scare me, it usually does." Shandin opened the can with her pocket knife and took a bite. The food was salty, thick, and tasted like something cooked long ago, but it filled the hollow in her stomach and brought tears to her eyes. "People talk," Thomas said finally. "They said my wife died because I made her stay on the ranch. Said I rode her too hard. Worked her to the bone. Then when I buried her up behind the cottonwoods without a preacher, they said it proved it." "Did you?" He turned to face her fully. "No." Shandian studied him in the silence that followed. The wind rattled the shutters. Ashki stirred and let out a sleepy sigh. "I know what it's like," she said quietly. "People making up stories. My husband Nesba, he drank after the mine shut. He couldn't find work, and he blamed me for every empty plate. One night he didn't come home. They found him face down in the river with a bottle in his hand. Folks said I pushed him." Thomas sank into the chair beside the stove and stared into the fire. "I didn't cry at the funeral," she said, looking down at her hands. "And I didn't say I was sorry. You didn't need to." The wind screamed outside like a living thing. The shack creaked and groaned, but the warmth inside grew. Shadows danced on the walls, softening the harsh lines of both their faces. The kettle whistled low. Thomas poured the hot water into a tin cup, dropping in a handful of dried leaves from a pouch he pulled from his coat. He handed the cup to her. "Sage and mint," he said. "My grandmother used to make it when we had nothing else." Shandin took a sip and felt the heat bloom down her throat, curling into her chest. Her eyes met his over the rim of the cup. "What do they call this place?" she asked. "Red Mesa Ridge. Closest town's a half-day west. But we're still on Navajo land. My ranch sits near the foothills just north of the wash. And the town cold. God-fearing. Suspicious of anyone who doesn't kneel the same way they do." She nodded. "I've known that kind of town. You still want to come?" Shandian looked at her baby, now sleeping peacefully. "I don't want to raise her in the dark. I want her to grow up knowing songs, stories, her name." Tomas studied her face, then nodded once. "We leave at first light." She wrapped Ashki tighter and leaned her head back against the rough log wall. Her eyes slipped shut for just a moment. "You said you wanted someone who wouldn't run," she murmured. "I did. Then know this, I've got nowhere left to run." He didn't reply, but the way his gaze held hers felt like an oath. The fire dimmed to a low hum of coals. Outside, the snow began to ease. Tomas added a few more logs, then returned to his chair, leaning back with a sigh. Shandian watched him from the cot, her heart still raw but no longer hollow. He hadn't promised her safety, hadn't offered salvation. But he'd ridden through a storm for a woman he didn't know and her half-frozen child. That was enough for now. Ashki let out a tiny cry in her sleep, and Shandian soothed her quickly. "She dreams loud," she said, smiling faintly. "That's a good sign," Thomas said. "Means she expects tomorrow." Shandian looked at the roof, at the beams overhead, laced with cobwebs, and whispered, "So do I." The fire popped. Thomas nodded once, then stood and pulled a blanket from his saddlebag. He tossed it to her, careful not to step too close. "You and the baby take the cot. I'll sit here. There's room. There's boundaries," he said gently. She didn't argue. The storm had passed by morning. The shack was silent except for the creak of wood and soft breath of sleeping child. Tomas stood at the doorway, saddle slung over his shoulder, staring west where sunlight broke through the thinning clouds. Behind him, Shandian stirred. He turned as she stood cradling Ashki in one arm, her other hand tightening the scarf around her hair. "I don't know what's waiting at that ranch," she said, "but I'm not scared." Tomas looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes. "You will be," he said, "but you'll go anyway." And she did. The road west cut through a barren landscape, jagged rocks, wind-stripped brush, and the occasional twisted cedar clinging to the red earth. The air was sharp, and the sky wore the pale hue of winter after a storm. Thomas rode in silence, the reins loose in his calloused hands. Shandian followed behind on his spare gelding, her daughter wrapped tightly to her chest beneath layers of wool and hide. By mid-morning, the snow had thinned into patchy dustings that clung to the shadows. The ground was frozen hard beneath the horse's hooves. Shandine's thighs ached from riding her fingers stiff despite the gloves. But she didn't complain. She kept her eyes forward, jaw set, the cold wind biting against her cheeks. Ahead, Thomas finally broke the silence. "There," he said, raising one gloved hand toward a ridge in the distance. "That line of cottonwoods marks the edge of my land." She saw it then, a stretch of weathered fencing, the dark shapes of cattle far off and beyond, that a squat house nestled against the rise, smoke trailing from its chimney. A barn stood nearby, part of the roof caved in. The rest was sparse fenced paddocks, snow-covered feed troughs and corrals that looked more bones than boards. He slowed as they approached. "It's not much. Never was. My father built it when there was still enough cattle to matter. Now it's just me, and whatever hasn't broken yet." As they reached the main yard, a dog barked. Not a sharp warning, but a deep, gravelly sound, old and familiar. A three-legged cattle dog hobbled out from beneath the porch, tail wagging once before dropping back down with a grunt. Tomas dismounted, tying his reins to the fence post. "That's Rust. Don't mind the limp. He acts like he owns the place." Shandine slid down carefully, her legs trembling. Ashki stirred against her chest, letting out a soft whimper. "You all right?" Thomas asked. "I will be." He nodded and pushed open the door to the house. The hinges groaned. The scent of smoke, dry pine, and dust greeted them. Firewood stacked by the hearth. "Stove in the kitchen still works if you keep her fed. There's 2 rooms, mine and the one you'll take. Don't use the back door. Latch broke last winter and I never fixed it." Shandine stepped inside slowly. The room was bare but not empty. A table with mismatched chairs. A worn quilt over the back of a rocking chair. A rifle mounted above the hearth. There was silence in the space, but not the kind that haunted it. Felt more like waiting. Ashki let out a tiny cry. Shandine pulled her close, then turned toward Tomas. "Thank you for letting us in." He rubbed the back of his neck and looked away. "You'll earn your place. That's enough, thanks." Over the next few days, the rhythm of the ranch took hold. Shandine rose before the sun, nursing Ashki in the quiet, her breath misting in the cold air. She swept the floors, boiled water for tea, and chopped vegetables with steady hands. When Thomas returned from the fields, she had a stew waiting and the stove burning warm. He never asked her to do it. She just did. In return, Thomas began leaving things silently without comment. A pair of soft moccasins left by the cot. A worn baby blanket folded at the foot of the bed. Dried berries on the table beside her bowl. One morning, while hanging wet linens in the yard, Shandine noticed an old woman approaching from the east trail, her frame slight, but upright, wrapped in layers of wool and turquoise beads that clinked softly with every step. She carried a walking stick and wore a shawl embroidered with desert flowers. Thomas saw her too and came down from the corral, wiping his hands on a rag. "Aunt Yazzie," he said, a smile tugging faintly at the corner of his mouth. "You didn't send word. You'd have made an excuse." Yazzie replied, her voice like wind over stone. She stopped before Shandine and looked her up and down. "So this is the woman I heard about." Shandine straightened. "I don't want trouble." Yazzie tilted her head, studying her. "Trouble makes you stronger. But I didn't come for that. I came to see if what I heard was true." Tomas stepped beside her. "She and her baby are staying. That's not up for discussion." Yazzie didn't look at him. Her eyes were still on Shandine. "I see the grief in your shoulders," she said, "but also the fight in your jaw. You'll need both." Shandian's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "Come," Yazi said, walking toward the house. "You'll both sit, I brought stories." They drank tea by the fire, the old woman spinning tales of mountains that sang and rivers that carried prayers. She spoke of the old ways of women who healed with their hands and men who spoke with the wind. Ashki slept against Shandian's chest, the whole time her tiny hand curled around the fringe of Shandian's shawl. Before she left, Yazi took Tomas aside. "She's not just passing through, is she? No. Then let her be more than another ghost on this land." He didn't answer, but the silence held weight. That night, Shandian stood at the window watching the moon rise over the ridge. "You've been quiet," Tomas said, pouring himself a cup of water. "Your aunt said I carry grief in my shoulders," she replied softly. "She's not wrong. I don't want it to harden me." He leaned against the doorframe. "Then don't let it." Shandian turned to face him. "What do people in town say about you? That I'm cold? That I buried my heart with my wife? Are they wrong?" He paused. "Then, not entirely." She nodded slowly. "Then let's both prove them wrong." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then with a quiet voice, he said, "One day at a time." Outside, the wind stirred the snow on the porch. Inside, the fire cracked softly, shadows flickering across their faces. For the first time in years, Tomas felt the house breathe. Not just hold warmth, but life. And in that flicker of firelight, the possibility of something whole glimmered between them, not yet named, but deeply felt. The first signs of spring came not with flowers, but with thawing earth and the slow, steady return of bird call. Melted snow soaked into the red clay, and the air smelled of wet cedar and new life. Shandian stood barefoot in the garden plot behind the house toes, pressed into the cool soil. Ashki was strapped to her back, his weight familiar and comforting. Her hands worked the earth with practiced care, loosening roots, turning compost, dreaming of beans and squash and wild tobacco that might grow come summer. From the hill above, Tomas watched. He'd spent the morning mending the old corral fence, though his eyes had drifted toward her more than once. There was something in her rhythm, a peace he hadn't seen in years. The same woman who had arrived starved and shivering now moved with certainty, grounded. She fit here as if the land had known her all along. He made his way down toward the garden, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "That's where my mother used to plant chili," he said, pointing to the far corner. "She swore the spirits made them hotter when planted at dawn." Shandian smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then I'll rise earlier tomorrow." Tomas chuckled softly. "Reckon I'll hold you to that?" She turned toward him. "Why don't you come down here? Your hands might remember the work." He hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the rows beside her. Together they dug, sifted, and planted. Their sleeves rolled the silence between them easy. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch, sipping water and watching the horizon blush, gold Yazi appeared again, this time on the back of a paint pony. "I brought something," she said, swinging down with the ease of someone half her age. And someone. From behind her emerged a teenage boy, tall and wiry, his black hair tied back, a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. His boots were worn but well kept, and his eyes didn't linger long on anything. "This is Toli," Yazi said. "My cousin's grandson. He's been drifting between jobs, mostly with horses. Good with his hands, better with silence." Toli gave a small nod. Shandian met his gaze and offered a soft smile. "He needs a place to root," Yazi added, "and this place looks like it's growing roots again." Tomas glanced at Shandian, then back at Yazi. "We could use the help if he's willing." "I'll work," Toli said. His voice was rough but not cold. Then it settled. That night the house grew warmer, not in temperature, but in spirit. Tolly took the small loft above the barn. He rose early, fed the horses before Thomas asked, and carved wooden figures in the evening. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when he did, his words were thoughtful. Days passed in rhythm. The fences mended. The barn roof was patched. Thomas taught Tolly how to sharpen tools the old way, and Shandien began sketching plans for a new smokehouse behind the shed. One afternoon, while Ashki napped and Thomas rode to the far ridge to check the spring, Shandien found Tolly fixing the porch steps. "Do you miss your home?" she asked, watching him drive a nail. He shrugged. "Didn't have much of one." She nodded. "I know what that's like." Tolly glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. "I used to think a home was something you were born into," she continued. "But I'm learning maybe it's something you build." He nodded once, then went back to hammering. "Takes the right kind of people." That evening the wind shifted. Tomas returned late, his shirt streaked with dust and worry in his eyes. "There's movement in the East Hills," he said. "Tracks, horse, and boot. Could be riders from Dineta or just travelers, but they were close." Shandien tensed. "Do you think they're from Tsilani? Can't be sure, but I'll be sleeping with the rifle closer." Yazi stayed the night, and Tolly sharpened every blade they had. The air in the house grew taut even as they went through the motions of normalcy. At dawn, smoke curled on the horizon, not from their chimney. Thomas saddled his horse. "I'm going to take a look. Won't go far?" "I'll come," Tolly said, already lacing his boots. "No," Thomas replied. "Stay here, watch the women, keep the dog close." Tolly's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Hours passed like molasses. Shandien paced the porch, arms crossed tightly, watching the ridgeline. Tolly sat on the steps, carving a hawk from cottonwood. When Tomas returned, his expression was unreadable. 3 men. Camped near the old canyon trail. Armed, but no signs they've been watching us yet. "Do you recognize them?" Shandien asked. "No, but they rode like men used to claiming things that weren't theirs." Rust growled from under the porch. "Do we leave?" Tolly asked. Tomas looked at him, then at Shandien, then finally at the sleeping baby swaddled in a basket near the hearth. "No," he said firmly. "Not this time." Shandien stepped beside him. "Then we stand together." He looked at her, really looked. "You'd stay, even if it meant danger." She met his gaze, calm and steady. "You gave us shelter when no one else would." "I won't run from that." Tolly stood. "And neither will I." Tomas exhaled as if releasing something heavy. Then from the window, Yazi's voice carried across the room. "You build a fire, you draw shadows, but you also bring warmth. Let them come." Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky turned copper with dusk. Ashki stirred and Shandien knelt to scoop him into her arms. He nestled against her soft breath against her neck. Tomas watched them both, heart stirred by a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. "You said you wanted to prove them wrong," he murmured. Shandien nodded. "Then let's begin." "You're not cursed, Shandien. You're the first light after a long dark. And if they come for you, they'll answer to me." The wind rolled in over the high desert, like breath from the mountain gods, tugging at the corners of the roof and stirring loose dust into the air. It moaned low and long through the broken cholla and sage-whispering omens no one wanted to interpret aloud. Inside the house, Shandien moved quietly, humming an old lullaby as she rocked Ashki to sleep. Her voice was low, steady, but her hands betrayed her. They trembled as they smoothed the blanket. Outside, Thomas was oiling the rifle for the 3rd time in 2 days. He sat on the porch, his back straight, eyes fixed on the horizon. Rust lay beside him, ears twitching at every gust. Toli worked near the barn, sharpening a hoe into a weapon. Even Yazzie, usually so full of dry jokes and sharp wisdom, had fallen silent. The men in the canyon hadn't moved yet, but their presence was a splinter in everyone's thoughts. Shandine came to the doorway, arms folded tightly over her chest. "If they come tonight, they won't," Thomas said, voice tight. "And if they do—" He looked up at her. "Then we meet them as we are, together." His answer settled into her bones like a stone dropped in a well. Steady. Real. That night the household slept lightly. Tomas dozed in the rocking chair by the door rifle across his lap. Shandine kept Ashki in her bed, one arm protectively curved around him. Toli stayed in the barn loft, knife at his hip. But morning came with no sign of intrusion, just a scorched sky thick with heat and the steady buzz of cicadas waking early. Still, it wasn't peace. The men in the canyon hadn't left. At midday, Thomas saddled his mare. "I'm riding to the trading post. Need to speak with someone who might know who they are." "I'll come," Shandine said. He shook his head. "Too risky. Then take Toli." Toli nodded, already stepping forward. Before they left, Thomas pressed a warm hand to Shandine's shoulder. "Lock the doors. Don't open unless it's us." She nodded, but her stomach knotted all the same. With the men gone, the house felt thinner somehow. Yazzie kept herself busy boiling juniper branches and lavender in a pot on the stove. The scent curled through the rooms, chasing off fear where words couldn't. "They'll be fine," Yazzie said, not looking up from her work. "Your man's got sand in his soul. That counts for something." Shandine didn't correct her. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Thomas and Toli reached the post by early afternoon. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that said more than words ever could. A few horses were tied up out front, but most of the regulars were gone. Inside the trader, a Navajo man named Nez looked up with a wary eye. "McCabe. Didn't expect you down from the hills." Thomas took off his hat. "Heard of any riders in from Tsilani men, rougher than usual?" Nez scratched his beard. "3 of them came through yesterday. Didn't trade, just asked about a woman with a child. Said she stole something. Claimed to be her kin." Thomas's jaw tensed. "They still here camped outside town. Not many folks want to cross 'em. One's a preacher or pretends to be. Real fire and brimstone type." Toli spat in the dust. "They came for her." Nez frowned. "That woman at your place," Thomas said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. Nez nodded slowly. "Careful, McCabe. Men like that don't just leave. They root, and they rot everything they touch." Back at the ranch, Shandine watched the road from the porch, her thoughts racing. She remembered the preacher's voice, Elijah, her late husband's brother, his sermons filled with fury and thunder. His rage had only grown after her husband's death. Blamed her. Called her a temptress, a witch, a bringer of plague. He'd driven her out of the village with spit and scripture, and now he was here. She looked down at Ashki playing with wooden animals Thomas had carved. His small fingers moved gently, arranging them in a circle. "They'll come for me," she whispered. Yazzie heard. "Let them try." That night the men returned. Thomas relayed what Nez had told him. Shandine didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just asked, when soon Thomas said, "He's not the waiting type." Toli stood by the hearth blade in hand. "Then we be ready." The days that followed were tense but strangely warm. Preparations brought unity. Thomas taught Toli how to shoot straight with the rifle. Yazzie fortified the cellar door. Shandine gathered herbs, mullein for lungs, yarrow for bleeding sage for protection. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the world in crimson and gold, Thomas found her by the well. "I won't let them take you," he said softly. She turned, face lit by dying light. Why, he stepped closer. "Because you've suffered enough. Because you've given more to this place than any of us. Because you make it a home." Her throat caught. "I don't want to run anymore." He brushed his fingers along her jaw. "You don't have to." She looked up at him, voice almost breaking. "They said I brought death with me. You brought life." She leaned into him, then forehead against his chest, and he held her like something sacred. Inside, Yazzie watched through the window, arms folded, a knowing smile on her face. About damn time. The sky turned silver with stars. Crickets sang low hymns in the tall grass. But somewhere far off, a crow called once, sharp and echoing. Tolly stood near the barn, eyes fixed on the canyon. "They're coming," he whispered. "The only thing between you and that door is me. And I won't move, not for God, man, or ghost." The first light of dawn broke like a promise across the mesa, painting the world in pale gold. It should have brought comfort, but it didn't. Not when 4 riders sat perched just beyond the canyon mouth, their dark silhouettes still as death against the rising sun. One of them dismounted and began walking slow and deliberate toward the house. Shandine stood at the window, her heart a drumbeat of dread. She held Ashki tightly, rocking him, as if the rhythm might still the storm in her chest. Yazzie placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Go down to the cellar. Now." "I'm not hiding again," Shandine said, voice low but sharp. Yazzie gave her a firm look. "You're not hiding. You're protecting. You keep that boy safe. You hear?" Shandine hesitated just for a breath, then nodded and disappeared down the narrow stairs, Ashki clutched to her chest. Outside, Thomas stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, but lowered. His boots crunched on frost-bitten dirt as he met the approaching man halfway between the house and the barn. The man wore a long black duster, dust clinging to it like it had risen from hell itself. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his mouth was a sneer carved in flesh. Elijah Thomas said flatly. "You McCabe," the preacher rasped. "I am. I came for the woman," Elijah said, "and the child. She ain't yours to come for, she's blood, the boy too. That woman's cursed. Her husband died under her roof, my brother. And now she's brought that curse to your land. You want to rot alongside her, that's your choice. But I've come to take her home, to cleanse her." Thomas's grip tightened on the rifle. "There's no cleansing needed. She's not a plague, preacher. She's flesh and blood. Same as you. Only thing wrong is the poison in your heart." Behind Elijah, his 3 men sat easy on their horses, but their hands rested too close to holsters to be mistaken for peaceful. "You'd kill for her?" Elijah asked. "No," Thomas said, "but I'll kill to protect her." A beat passed, then another. The preacher's eyes narrowed, face twitching with something between fury and disbelief. "You'd spill blood for a harlot who brought death. I'd spill blood for a woman who's had everything taken and still finds a way to give." A crow called in the distance. Elijah stepped back and raised a hand. One of his men dismounted. Another reached into his saddlebag and pulled a rope. Tolly stepped from the barn, then rifle raised, silent and unmoving. Yazzie stood on the porch with her own shotgun cradled in her arms. Rust barked wild and vicious. Elijah sneered. "You make your choice, McCabe. You stand with her, you fall with her. Better to fall with the truth," Thomas said, "than live with your lies." The preacher turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted without another word. As they rode off, Thomas exhaled like he'd been holding breath for a lifetime. But he knew this wasn't over. That night the ranch breathed in shallow gasps. Every creak of the windmill or groan of the wind put everyone on edge. Shandine sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a tin mug she hadn't drunk from. Her eyes didn't blink. They didn't even look at anything in particular. "I've seen what he does when he thinks God's on his side," she said quietly. "He won't stop." Thomas reached across the table. "Then we don't stop either." Why her voice broke a little. "Why are you risking everything? You barely know me." He shook his head slowly. "That's not true. I've seen you keep breathing when you wanted to disappear. I've seen you raise that boy with hands that tremble but never drop him. I've seen you bring life back to a house where even the shadows gave up." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "I was never meant to be anyone's miracle." "You're not," he said. "You're just you. And that's enough." The next 2 days passed like coiled wire tents, tight, waiting to snap. Thomas sent Tolly to scout the canyon. When he returned, his face was grim. "They've built a fire camp, not leaving." Yazzie spat into the dirt. "That devil's gonna wait till dark and strike like a rattler. We'll meet him ready," Thomas said. They stacked firewood near the windows, sharpened blades, loaded every rifle and revolver they had. The ranch became a fortress built not of stone, but of loyalty. On the third night it happened. The first bullet shattered the lantern hanging on the front porch. Rust's barking turned feral. Tomas dove from the chair, dragging Shandine and Ashki behind the hearth. Tolly returned fire from the barn. Yazzie moved with a speed that defied her age, window-to-window barrel flashing like thunder in the dark. Outside, the preacher's men hollered. Flames licked the edges of the haystack fire, reflecting in the eyes of horses gone wild. Thomas burst from the front door, rifle blazing. One of the attackers went down a scream, cutting through the dark. Another fired, clipping the porch rail. Tolly emerged from the barn like a shadow, silent and deadly. He took out the second man with a shot that echoed against canyon walls. But Elijah remained. He stepped from the darkness, torch in one hand, pistol in the other. His eyes burned with madness. "Witch," he roared. "You'll burn for what you've done." Shandine rose from her hiding place, hands shaking, but eyes clear. She stepped into the light between her son and the preacher. "I've burned already, Elijah. You lit the fire years ago." He raised the pistol. Before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out. Thomas stood behind her, smoke curling from his rifle barrel. Elijah dropped, face twisted in fury, even in death. Silence settled like snow. Ashki whimpered. Shandine dropped to her knees, pulling him close. Thomas came to her, crouched, wrapped his arms around both. Yazzie stepped outside, shotgun over her shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. Tolly walked from the barn, quiet and firm, nodding once. The fire was out, the danger gone, but the echoes would linger. Inside the house, the baby cried again. Shandine rocked him slowly, pressing her lips to his soft black hair. "Safe," she whispered. "You're safe." And though the night still howled through broken windows, inside the ranch held steady. But the town would come asking questions soon, and not all would be friendly. The preacher had friends, and friends had power. Thomas knew they'd only won the first battle. The real war for truth, for love, for a life together was just beginning. They think because they wear a badge they can bury truth under paperwork. But I remember every face that looked the other way. The heavy knock came just after sunrise. Not the knock of neighbors, not the rhythm of kindness, but the flat, impersonal thud of someone sent by the government. Thomas stood at the front door, his shirt still damp from washing the soot off the barn wall. When he opened it, 2 men stood on the porch, one wearing the stiff tan uniform of the county sheriff, the other in a pressed black suit with boots that hadn't touched dirt in months. "Mr. McCabe," the suited man asked. "I am Thomas," replied, brushing his hands on his jeans. "I'm Agent Howarth. This is Sheriff Blanton. We're here to ask a few questions about the incident 3 nights ago." Thomas didn't invite them in. Instead, he stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "You mean the raid?" "We've heard conflicting reports," Howarth said, already scribbling in a leather notebook. "Firearms discharged. 1 fatality. Some say it was a robbery. Others say a land dispute." "It was attempted murder," Thomas said bluntly. "They came to take a woman and her son by force." Sheriff Blanton squinted toward the horizon. "This Elijah Gaines. You claim he was the aggressor. I don't claim it," Thomas said. "I watched it." "And where's the woman now?" Howarth asked. "Safe," Thomas replied. The agent clicked his pen closed slowly. "We'll need a formal statement, and we'll need to speak with her. You'll get one. But not today." Howarth smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll be back, Mr. McCabe." As they turned, Thomas saw it parked just beyond the hill, half hidden by the scrub brush. A third car, another man inside snapping photographs with a long-lensed camera. They weren't just gathering statements. They were building a case. Inside the house, Shandian stood at the kitchen window, her breath fogging the glass. "Did they see Ashki?" "No," Tomas said, crossing to her. "They didn't get past me." Her fingers trembled around the teacup. "They'll come again." "Yes," Tomas said. "But we'll be ready." Later that day, Tolly returned from the trading post with news. "Preacher's brother filed a complaint in Silver Creek," he said, dropping the crumpled page on the table. "Claiming the boy is blood. Says you're harboring fugitives." Thomas read the official letter, each word heavier than the last. The accusation wasn't just about harboring. It called into question land rights, property damage, and implied federal crimes. "Preacher's dead," Yazzie muttered, pacing. But his voice still echoes through the walls. "They want Ashki," Shandin said, her voice tight. "They don't care about justice. They care about bloodlines, about ownership." Tolly nodded. "They'll turn this into a legal war. Take him from you in court if they can't do it by force." "I won't let that happen," Thomas said. The silence in the room deepened. Words meant little when the law was a blade that cut crooked. That evening, as the sun sagged low behind the cliffs, Shandian walked out past the fence line, needing the open space. Ashki rode on her hip cheeks pressed against her neck. She didn't hear the footsteps until the woman was nearly beside her. Tall, wrapped in a red woven shawl, her eyes clear and sharp as ice in spring. It was Elsie Longfeather, cousin to Yazzie, and known to most in these parts as a woman who saw further than most. "Word travels," Elsie said. "Faster than wind and twice as wild." Shandin didn't reply, just shifted Ashki gently. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," Elsie continued. "But maybe it was time." "I didn't mean to," Shandin whispered. "No one ever means to when they're just trying to survive," Elsie said. "But surviving, especially as a mother, isn't small. It's a storm." They stood there in silence, watching the wind run over the brush. "I want him to grow up somewhere good," Shandian finally said. "Where he's not a shame or a target. Where he's just a boy." Elsie looked at her, and there was a softness in her gaze. "Then we fight to build that place. For him. For all of us." That night, the community gathered. It started with one pickup pulling into the ranch yard, then another. Soon, headlights cast long shadows across the house as old friends and new ones stepped out. Diné elders, neighbors, ranchers who remembered the Gaines family's legacy of fire and fear. Yazzie called it what it was, a circle. A circle meant something out here. It meant standing between the vulnerable and the storm. It meant memory strength and a place to speak. Around the fire pit, Thomas stood and spoke first. They say we broke the law, that we harbor a woman who doesn't belong here, that we defied men of God and men of government. Maybe we did. But I'll tell you what else we did. We saved a life. And if that makes me guilty, then I'm ready to be judged. A few murmurs of agreement. Then Shandian rose. She didn't speak loudly, but her voice cut through the air like a clear stream running through canyon rock. I was a wife once. Then I became a widow. Then I became a fugitive, not for a crime, but because I refused to give my son to men who used the Bible like a club. I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came because I had nowhere left. She looked around the fire, and now somehow I have more than I ever dreamed. Elsie stepped forward, her shawl glowing with the firelight. Let them come with paper and pens, she said. We'll meet them with memory, with truth, with history written not in ink but in blood and sweat. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was something deeper, a refusal to be erased. Days passed, and word of the gathering traveled. More letters came, some threatening, some supportive. Thomas began drafting a statement with an old lawyer friend from Gallup. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a line in the sand. But even amid the fight, life continued. Ashki took his first steps on the porch. Rust gave birth to a litter of puppies in the hayloft. And for the first time, laughter returned to the house, not constant, not loud, but enough to remind them all that joy was still allowed. Still possible, still theirs. But trouble wasn't done yet. One morning a package arrived. No note, no sender. Inside was a single child's shoe burned at the toe, wrapped in a page torn from the Bible. They all stared at it for a long time. No one spoke. Until Thomas said, "We're not backing down." And Yazi, without looking up, replied, "We never were." They don't just want Ashki. They want to rewrite who we are, who we've been. But names carry weight. Blood remembers. The storm came in the middle of the night. Not one of wind or rain, but headlights and boots tires chewing gravel like teeth grinding bone. Thomas was already awake. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table with an old map spread before him and a shotgun leaning against the chair leg. When the first door slammed outside, he rose calm and quiet, like a man who had known this moment was coming his whole life. Shandine came down the hall with Ashki clutched tight to her chest. Her eyes were wide, her lips pale. "It's them." He nodded once. "Take him. Go with Yazi through the back trail. Stay low, no lantern. What about you? I'm not letting them break this door down. That's not the kind of welcome I offer." She hesitated only a second before disappearing down the narrow hall. From the barn, a faint whistle pierced the silence, the signal from Yazi that the path was clear. Thomas walked to the front door, pulled it open before they could knock. 5 men, 3 in county deputy uniforms, 2 in suits that looked borrowed from bigger cities, all pale under the harsh glare of their own flashlights. "Where's the boy?" the tallest asked. "You have no warrant," Thomas said. The man stepped forward, flashing a laminated badge. "This is a federal order signed by Judge Renner. Child welfare retrieval under immediate custody. The boy belongs to kin. He is not safe here." Thomas didn't move. "He's not property, and he's not here. We'll see about that." They pushed past him, boots stomping over braided rugs, knocking over a lamp as if it were trash. One of them yanked open cupboards. Another banged on walls, listening for hollow sounds. "You think we're hiding him behind a fake wall?" Thomas asked dryly. No one answered. In the back pasture, a dark silhouette moved through the brush, Yazi guiding Shandine and Ashki on foot, wrapped in a thick blanket to muffle sound. Rust circled ahead like a ghost, keeping their path clean and safe. Back in the house, the agents tore through drawers. One deputy found a worn photo on the mantel and paused Shandin and Ashki standing beside Tomas, the boy laughing so hard his eyes had disappeared into squints. The agent set it down slowly, as if realizing what they were actually breaking wasn't just walls or privacy, but something sacred. After 15 minutes, they stopped. "He's not here," one of the deputies muttered. "You've made your statement," Thomas said, voice firm. "Now make your exit." As they filed out, the man in charge turned back. "This isn't over. You're harboring an abducted child. When the law catches up, there'll be no place left to run." "I'm not running," Thomas said. "I'm standing." The screen door slammed behind them. At dawn, the community gathered again. Word had spread fast. Elsie arrived first, her shawl darker than usual, signaling grief or war. Behind her came Toli, grim and silent, and Lena Martin, who brought fry bread and prayer beads. They sat around the ashes of the fire pit, each face drawn tight. "They came without warning," Thomas said. "They say it's law, but it's theater. They want to drag her into court and twist her story until no one remembers the truth." Elsie nodded. "They're not after justice. They're after control." "They filed with the tribal court too," Toli added, "claiming Elijah's brother has paternal rights despite the abuse record." Lena's voice cracked. "They don't care that he beat her. They only care that he was blood." "No," Shandin said, stepping into the circle. Her voice held quiet fire. "They care that I wasn't supposed to survive him. I was supposed to disappear like the others, like my aunt, like my cousin. Silence is what they're used to, but I won't be silent." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Then Yazzie lifted a bundle wrapped in red cloth documents, affidavits, photos, and letters. "I've got records, witnesses, the school nurses' statements. It won't fix the law, but it'll slow them." Thomas looked at the bundle. "That's our next move. We go to court not because we believe it'll save us, but because we make them fight for every lie they try to tell." "And if they win anyway?" Lena asked. "Then we make sure everyone knows what they stole." The drive to the tribal courthouse in Chinle was long and silent. Thomas drove. Shandin sat in the back with Ashki asleep in her lap. Elsie rode shotgun, flipping through the pages of their evidence. She'd known the judge Vivian Nez years ago, before politics, before everything got tangled in bureaucracy. When they arrived, the courthouse steps were already lined with people supporters holding hand-painted signs, others just watching. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, and smelling faintly of old paper and cedar. Judge Nez sat tall, expression unreadable. She had seen too many cases like this to be moved by emotion alone. The prosecutor laid out his case first. Elijah's brother, Ezekiel Gaines, was the closest blood relative, and therefore had a right to guardianship. Tomas was an unrelated party. Shandin was accused of endangering the boy by fleeing instead of seeking help. Then Tomas spoke. He didn't shout. He didn't embellish. He told the truth, how he'd found them broken and afraid, how the preacher died in his own violence, how no one else had stepped forward to protect a child. "We're not asking for pity," he said. "We're asking for decency." Then Elsie read the nurse's statement. And finally, Shandin stood. "I was born into silence," she said. "Taught never to cry too loud or ask too many questions. But I learned that silence is where monsters hide. My son won't grow up afraid of his own name. He will not be handed off to a man who stood by while his brother beat women in God's name." She paused. "If you return him to that, then you are not my judge. You are his jailer." The room held its breath. Judge Nez looked over the documents again, her fingers slow and deliberate. "This court will recess for review," she finally said. "A decision will be issued in 48 hours." Back at the ranch, the wind picked up. They stood on the porch that evening watching storm clouds bruise the sky. "Do you think she'll rule in our favor?" Shandian asked quietly. "I don't know," Thomas said, but she listened. Rust barked once and bolted toward the fence line. A dust trail curled in the distance, another vehicle unfamiliar, unannounced. Yazzie stepped up beside them, rifle already slung over his shoulder. "That ain't no court, officer." The car stopped just beyond the gate. A man stepped out, tall, thin, with silver rings on every finger. Ezekiel Gaines. He lifted a Bible in one hand, in the other a folded legal document, and he smiled. The war was far from over. They want to paint over the past like it never bled. But blood doesn't forget, and neither do we. Ezekiel's smile didn't falter, even as Thomas stepped off the porch with fire in his eyes. The man looked like he'd just strolled out of a revival tent. Clean white shirt, buttoned to the throat, turquoise bolo tie, cinched tight under his Adam's apple, as if strangling himself for God. That Bible in his hand looked more like a weapon than a scripture. "You came all this way just to trespass?" Thomas asked, voice low but sharp. Ezekiel held up the folded legal paper, letting it flutter in the wind like a flag of arrogance. "Thought I'd deliver it personally. You know, show there's no hard feelings. That paper's nothing but ink. It doesn't make you a father. No, but it makes me a Gaines. And that name carries more than blood, it carries rights." Shandin stepped forward, shoulders squared, her hand resting on Ashki's small back, where he clung to her hip. "You carry pain. That's all I remember about your brother, and you stood by while he poured it out. I stood by because it wasn't my place. But I'm stepping in now. That boy's kin, and you're just a stray my brother took in out of pity." Before Thomas could speak, Yazzie moved, rifle slung down casually, but his eyes said otherwise. "You'll want to step back into that car, preacher. You've delivered your threat. Don't wait around to see what we deliver back." Ezekiel's jaw twitched, but he stepped off the gravel, slowly, eyes never leaving Thomas's. "The court will choose blood. They always do. You people think you're a tribe, but this land's not sacred anymore. It's paperwork. And I've got more of it than you." He left dust in his wake. Inside the house, Ashki wouldn't let go of his mother. He clung to her with that same stubborn quiet that had grown in him since the night of their escape. Shandin tucked him into the corner of the old couch and knelt beside him. "You're safe," she whispered. "I promise." "Will he take me?" Ashki asked, voice barely a breath. "No, not while I breathe." The storm outside cracked against the windows, but it was nothing compared to the one unraveling inside their home. Thomas stood by the fire, staring into the flames. "Ezekiel isn't coming alone. He'll bring witnesses, documents, stories twisted backward to sound like truth. We have less than 24 hours before the next hearing." Yazzie leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "Then we don't sleep." Elsie arrived just before midnight, carrying a canvas bag full of ledgers and clippings. "You said to dig deep." "I did." Inside were testimonies from women who'd fled the Gaines household over the years, ones who'd never made it to court. A note from a shelter director in Winslow, whose handwriting trembled even on paper. "I remember her. The girl with the bruises and the boy who never cried." There was more. A letter from Elijah's first wife, sealed for years. Lena Martin's statement about the night she treated Shandian's fractured ribs. Tomas sorted it all page by page. We need to do more than defend. We need to show who that man is. Who we are. The next morning, the courthouse was quiet when they arrived, but not empty. A row of black-suited lawyers stood near Ezekiel, their boots polished and expressions cold. He had money behind him now. That much was clear. Judge Nez stepped in with a furrowed brow and no patience for performance. Ezekiel stood to speak, first invoking blood ties, citing custody statutes, painting himself as a man of faith and structure who only wanted to rescue a boy from chaos. Shandayan never looked away from him. Not once. Then it was Thomas's turn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to match their polished legalese. He spoke plain like the land they all stood on. You say this boy is blood. I say blood is more than DNA. It's who tucks you in when you wake from night terrors. It's who teaches you to braid your hair, who listens when you don't have words yet. And this man, he sat silent while his brother hurt children. He calls that faith. I call that rot. Then Elsie took the stand. Her voice was thin, but her story cut like glass. I was there the night she came crawling to the clinic, holding her ribs like they might fall apart. You want to give her child to that man's kin, then you're not protecting family, you're continuing abuse. One by one, the community stepped up. Yazzie, Lena, even the shelter director joining by video call, her voice trembling but resolute. And then Shandine walked to the front. She wore her grandmother's turquoise necklace, the one that always hung close to her throat when she was afraid. I was 14 when Elijah found me, she began. I thought I was being saved. I didn't know I was being silenced. She paused. The courtroom was so still, it seemed time had paused. When I left, I had nothing but my son and the bruises. I found Thomas not because I was looking for a cowboy, but because I was looking for a place that didn't feel like dying. This man, she pointed at Ezekiel, has never held ashki. He's never cooked him a meal, read him a book, or kissed him goodnight. He is a stranger. And if this court gives my son to a stranger because he shares a last name, then what does that say about who we are as people, as a tribe? Judge Nez held her gaze a long time. You're not asking the court to pity you. No, Shandian said. I'm asking the court to recognize truth. That night they returned to the ranch in silence. The hearing was over. The decision would come in the morning. But as Thomas pulled up to the house, he saw the front gate swinging. Rust was nowhere in sight. The front door was cracked open. He drew his pistol and signaled Yazzie. They crept toward the porch. Hearts pounding. Inside the living room was overturned. Cushions on the floor, a broken lamp, and Ashki's blanket lying alone. Shandine screamed, "He's gone!" Her voice cracked like ice. "Thomas, he's gone!" Yazzie found tracks, boot prints near the side fence, fresh tire marks in the mud behind the barn. They came while we were gone, Yazzie said grimly. Took him like thieves in the dark. Thomas knelt by the doorframe and picked up a folded piece of paper. A note scrawled in furious ink. If the court won't do what's right, I will. Ezekiel Shandine collapsed to her knees. Thomas closed his eyes, jaw tight. Then we ride. There would be no waiting on justice now. Some men use God to excuse their cruelty, but real faith doesn't steal children, it protects them. The wind was already howling over the mesa when Thomas, Yazzie, and Shandine galloped out past the south ridge following the boot prints that led into the sandstone bluffs. The desert was turning dark, fast shadows slipping between rocks like ghosts, the kind the old stories warned about. But none of that fear compared to what clawed through Shandian's chest. Ashki was somewhere out here, with him. Tracks veer east, Yazzie shouted, reining his horse toward a narrow trail that wound through Dead Man's Pass. He's headed toward Chinley Wash. Smart route, less patrols, less people. Tomas pushed his mare forward, heart pounding harder with every turn. He won't take him to court. He's running. Ezekiel's always believed in power over law. He wants to break her, Yazzie muttered, just like his brother did. Shandine didn't respond. She was ahead of both men, her horse cutting through the dusk like firelight. Her jaw-clenched eyes fixed forward. Rage and fear burned through her like twin storms. Every rock, every breeze seemed to whisper her son's name. Ezekiel's truck barreled down the dirt road that skirted the canyon tires, fishtailing on loose gravel. Inside, Ashki sat silent in the back seat, his face pale, eyes wide but dry. The boy hadn't screamed. He hadn't kicked. He'd just stared like something ancient inside him had gone still. Ezekiel watched him in the rearview mirror. "You're coming home, boy. Your mama's poisoned you, but I'll set you right. Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child." Ashki didn't speak, but his small fingers moved in his lap, pressing the leather bracelet Thomas had tied around his wrist just days ago. A symbol of strength, of home. "You'll thank me later," Ezekiel added, tightening his grip on the wheel as the road curved toward the canyon's edge. Night had fallen like a dropped curtain when Thomas and Yazzie spotted the truck tracks in the soft dirt. They skidded to a stop near the ledge where the road split, one trail leading toward the wash, the other winding into the high pass. "Two sets of prints," Yazzie said, dismounting. He crouched low, palm brushing the dirt. "One set's lighter. Small steps." Ashki Shandine breathed. "He's close," Thomas said, scanning the dark horizon. "We split up, you two take the pass. I'll sweep the lower trail." Shandine looked at him, her face a mask of desperation and determination. "Don't stop if you see him first." "I won't." They split without another word, hooves thundering into the night. Inside the truck, Ezekiel pulled off the road and parked near an abandoned church, half swallowed by sagebrush and time. Its roof sagged, and the cross had long since fallen, now a crooked scar on the dirt. He turned to Ashki. "We'll rest here till morning. I'll teach you what a real man of God looks like." He reached for the boy's arm. Ashki shrank back. "Don't you flinch. Weakness is the devil whispering in your ear." Then the boy did something Ezekiel didn't expect. He stared him dead in the eyes and said, "You're not God." Ezekiel froze. "You don't talk to God. You use him to hurt people." Fury twisted Ezekiel's face. He raised a hand, but a flash of movement outside the window stopped him. A figure on horseback outlined against the moonlight. Then another. And another. Ezekiel cursed and lunged out of the truck, dragging Ashki with him. "You brought the devil with you, huh?" he hissed. "Fine. We'll settle this like men." He yanked the boy toward the back of the church, vanishing into the dark as Thomas and Yazzie slid from their horses. Spread out, Thomas barked, gun drawn. He won't run far with the boy. Inside the ruined church, Ezekiel shoved Ashki into a corner and crouched beside him. "They're liars. All of them. They poisoned your mama, and now they want to poison you." Ashki looked at him, voice calm. "You already did." From outside, wood creaked. Footsteps approached. "You step in here," Ezekiel shouted, "and you'll need more than prayers." Thomas's voice answered low and firm. "Put the boy down, Ezekiel. This doesn't have to end like your brother." Ezekiel laughed, bitter. "You think you're better than him. You're nothing but a hand on her hip. A man playing house with another man's blood." Thomas stepped through the doorway slowly. "I never raised my voice at her. I never raised my hand. That makes me better." Ezekiel swung the pistol up from his coat pocket, but he wasn't fast enough. Yazzie fired once from the rear window. The bullet didn't kill it, buried itself in Ezekiel's shoulder, spinning him backward. Ashki ran, straight into Thomas's arms. The preacher fell to his knees, clutching his wound. Shandian entered behind Yazzie, heart breaking open at the sight of her son's safe. Ashki turned in Thomas's arms. He said I was broken. Shandian knelt beside them, tears streaking her face. You're not. You're whole, and you're mine. They walked out together under the stars. Behind them, Ezekiel was cuffed by tribal officers already called in by Yazzie's signal earlier. As he was led away, he whispered, You'll see. Blood always wins. Shandian turned to him, her voice like wind over stone. No. Love does. Back at the ranch, dawn rose quietly over the high desert. The sun spilled gold over the cedar posts, the corral, the porch swing Thomas had made for Ashki last fall. Inside, the judge's decision had come in by courier. Shandian opened the envelope with trembling hands. Full custody, permanently assigned to her. No more hearings, no more threats. Tomas exhaled like he hadn't breathed in weeks. It's over. But Shandian shook her head. Not yet. The past doesn't leave just because the door shuts. She looked at her son, curled in sleep on the couch. We have to show him something better. That's how it ends. Tomas nodded slowly. Then we begin again. Outside, Rust barked as a pair of hawks flew overhead, wings wide open. The wind whispered across the mesa, no longer cruel, just part of the land's endless song. I never thought healing would feel this strange, like learning to breathe in a room where no one's shouting. Ashki stood barefoot on the porch, the morning sun warming his face. He tilted his head slightly, listening to the wind roll off the buttes in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful. Too peaceful, almost like a stillness he didn't trust yet. His shoulders remained half-tensed, like they'd grown used to, bracing for a voice that would come crashing down on him. But none came. Inside, the smell of blue corn pancakes drifted out from the kitchen. Shandian was humming a soft tune her grandmother used to sing during planting season. The sound curled gently through the house like sage smoke. It didn't ask anything of him. It just was. He leaned into the wooden post, arms crossed, watching Thomas in the corral with the horses. The man moved slow and easy as always, quiet hands, steady voice. He was brushing down one of the mares, whispering something only the animal could hear. Ashki couldn't imagine his uncle like that gentle kind. The contrast was so sharp it cut. He didn't flinch anymore, but some parts of him still didn't know what to do with all this. Calm. Shandian stepped out onto the porch with 2 cups of tea. He told me you helped Rust with the gate latch yesterday. Ashki shrugged. It was stuck. Rust said you figured it out on your own. Took a while, but you didn't quit. The boy didn't answer, just took the tea in both hands and stared into it like it held a map. She sat beside him and let the silence stretch. They'd learned not to fill every space with talk. Some healing came in between the words. I got a letter yesterday, she said after a while, from the school counselor. She said your essays were strong. One of them made her cry. Ashki's ears turned red. It wasn't supposed to. She said it was real, brave. He looked away. I didn't write about him, not really. You don't have to. I don't want to forget. But I don't want to remember how it felt either. Is that bad? No, she said softly. It means you're walking through it. That's the hardest part. He nodded, eyes shining. I didn't think I could. Shandian placed her hand over his. That's what they wanted you to believe, that you were broken. But you're not. You're growing. Tomas approached the porch, brushing his hands on his jeans. River looks good today, he said with a tilt of his head toward the horizon. You up for a ride, Ashki? The boy hesitated, then nodded. They took the southern trail, the one that wound along the creek bed, through cottonwoods just beginning to bud for spring. Thomas rode ahead, Rust loping alongside. Ashkey followed close behind, balanced and quiet in the saddle. He didn't speak much, but he watched everything. Halfway down the trail, Thomas dismounted near a boulder with a flat top. "Used to come here after my dad passed," he said, tying the reins to a scrub branch. "Place always felt like it was listening." Ashkey looked around. "It's quiet, not empty, just peaceful." They sat together on the rock, listening to the water tumble over small stones. Thomas glanced at him. "You ever think about building something? Not just words, something with your hands?" Ashkey looked down at his palms. "Like what? Whatever you want. Coop, bench, birdhouse. I'm not good with tools. You weren't good with a horse once either. But here you are." Ashkey cracked a small smile. "What if it turns out bad? Then you learn. You try again. That's what men do. Not beat themselves or others. Just build, fix, try." The boy nodded slowly. "I've got extra wood in the barn," Thomas added casually. "Think we could find something to hammer together?" Ashkey's eyes sparked just a little. That afternoon, they worked side by side, measuring sawing sanding. At first, Ashkey was stiff-guarded, but as the hours passed and Thomas patiently guided him through each step, his movements grew more confident. By dusk, the frame of a small bench stood crooked but sturdy. Ashkey stood back, arms crossed, lips twitching. "It leans. It leans, proud," Thomas said. "We'll call it character." Shandine appeared in the barn doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner's almost ready." Ashkey didn't move right away. He stared at the bench, then turned to Thomas. "Can I carve something in it?" Of course. He took the knife Thomas offered and knelt by the top rail. With careful strokes, he etched 2 small letters, "Ho." "Hope?" Thomas asked gently. "Home," Ashkey said. Shandine swallowed hard. Later that night, after dishes and laughter and stories by the fire, Shandine stepped outside to find Yazzie leaning on the porch rail. He had a clipboard in hand, some papers fluttering in the light breeze. "Got news," he said, handing them to her. "Ezekiel's trial date's set. Court wants testimony." Her heart clenched. "I was afraid of that. They might call Ashkey, too. Defense will want to muddy the waters. He's not ready. Then you testify and I'll handle the rest." She looked up at him, eyes fierce. "I'm not afraid of that man, but I'm afraid of what remembering might do to my son." Yazzie nodded. "You'll know what to do. You always do." She looked back inside where Thomas sat with Ashkey reading aloud from a book. The boy's head rested against his shoulder, eyes beginning to drift. "I thought peace would look like silence," she murmured. "But it sounds like this. A voice that doesn't hurt. A house that doesn't echo." "Peace ain't the absence of noise," Yazzie said. "It's the presence of safety." Shandine nodded. "Then I'll fight to keep it. Whatever it takes." That night, sleep came easy to Ashkey. He didn't toss or turn. The bracelet Thomas gave him lay on the nightstand next to a small piece of wood he'd been carving another bench, this one tiny rough, but shaped with care. Downstairs, Shandine sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread before her. She circled the court date, then underlined one sentence, "Victim impact statement encouraged." She picked up a pen and began to write. Not for vengeance, but for truth, for protection, for love, for home. I'm not who I was, and that's my victory. Ashkey sat in the witness room, hands clasped tightly in his lap. The courthouse in Gallup felt colder than the winter winds sweeping across the mesa. Outside, snow dusted the sidewalks soft as ash. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed with a hum that set his teeth on edge. The walls were too white, too clean. It made everything feel like it was pretending. Yazzie sat beside him, flipping through a thick folder. He wasn't saying much, just being there. That was enough. You don't have to speak, Yazzie reminded gently. You've already given your statement. This is only if they push. Ashki nodded. His stomach turned anyway. Down the hall, Shandian stood waiting to be called into the courtroom. Her skirt was pressed hair neatly braided down her back. In her hand, she held her written statement, 3 pages folded and refolded until the edges curled like dry leaves. Her voice wasn't steady when she first rehearsed it, but now her eyes were dry, calm, still. A desert wind before the storm. The bailiff called her name. Ashki watched her walk away without looking back. He wanted to call out, wanted to say he was proud, that he didn't blame her, that none of what happened was her fault. But the words lodged in his chest like stones, so instead he closed his eyes and breathed. Inside the courtroom, Ezekiel looked smaller than Shandian remembered, older. The county jumpsuit hung off his shoulders like a borrowed lie. His eyes darted when she stepped up to the witness stand, but he didn't meet hers. The judge gave her the nod. She unfolded the pages. My name is Shandin Nez. I am the mother of Ashki Nez, and I am here not just to speak for myself, but for every woman who has ever stayed silent out of fear. Every child who has flinched at footsteps. Every soul who's been told they are less than worthy of love. Ezekiel shifted in his seat. For years I believed your temper was my fault. That if I just tried harder, prayed longer, kept the house cleaner, you might change. But now I know your cruelty was never about me. It was about power, and fear, and control. But you don't have that anymore. She paused. My son used to cry in his sleep. He used to flinch when someone moved too fast. Now he builds benches and writes essays. He laughs at dinner. He brushes horses with hands that are learning gentleness. That's not your doing. That's ours. That's healing. Yazzie glanced at Ashki through the courtroom window. The boy sat up straighter. Shandin continued. You told me I'd never survive without you, that no one would want a broken woman, that I'd have nowhere left. Her voice strengthened. Well, I do have somewhere. I have family. I have friends. I have land that welcomes my footsteps. I have a man who listens without needing to speak over me, and I have a son who is finally free. The silence in the courtroom was weighty, respectful. I'm not here to curse you. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to protect the boy you tried to destroy. I'm here because I choose light over shadow. And I hope sincerely that someday you understand what you lost. She folded the paper. That's all. When she exited, Ashki was standing in the hall, eyes wide. I heard some of it, he said. Through the door. Shandian wrapped him in her arms tighter than she ever had. You don't have to go in. The judge has what he needs. I want to, he said. Not to talk about the bad stuff. Just to say something. Yazzie raised an eyebrow, but didn't object. The boy's voice had changed, not in pitch, but in weight. It carried. They allowed him 5 minutes. When he stood before the judge, hands behind his back, he didn't even glance at Ezekiel. My name is Ashki Nez, he said. And I'm not scared anymore. He looked at the judge, then the attorneys. Then back at his mother, who gave the smallest nod. I used to think people like me didn't get to grow up right, but I'm learning that you can be hurt and still become someone strong, that you can love without fear, that you can build something better. And I'm going to. He paused. I don't hate him. I just don't want him near me again. Then he turned and walked out, boots clicking softly on the polished floor. Sentencing took another month. Ezekiel received 10 years. Not nearly enough, but enough to keep him far away. The day the letter arrived, Shandian didn't cry. She went out to the corral and told the horses first, then Thomas, then Ashki. It's not forever, she said. But it's something. Maybe forever isn't the point, Ashki said. Maybe it's just knowing we're not trapped anymore. Spring came late to the mesa that year. Snow clung longer to the butte crests, but the air warmed just enough to carry birdsong again. Rust was teaching Ashki to mend a saddle. Tomas built a new chicken coop, and in the afternoons, Shandian sat on the porch, with Yazi drinking cold coffee and watching clouds roll over red earth. One day, as the sun dipped behind the distant peaks, Ashki stepped out, with something hidden behind his back. I made you something, he said. She raised an eyebrow. He revealed a wooden carving, a small bench identical to the one they built together, but carved with precision and sanded smooth. On its side, in careful letters, he'd etched a new word, family. Tomas came behind him holding a blanket. You ready? He asked. They all walked together to the oak tree near the edge of the land. Beneath its arms, they laid the tiny bench on a stone platform. For the ones who made it through, Ashki whispered. And the ones still trying. Shandian wrapped her arm around him. Look at you, she said, voice catching. You're not who you were. Ashki turned to her, a quiet light in his eyes. I know, he said. And that's my victory. The educational lesson learned from this story is that even in life's later chapters, resilience and kindness can lead to healing and second chances. When all seems lost, the simple act of helping one another, whether offering shelter, listening, or standing firm, can rebuild what was broken. Trust takes time, but love and community are powerful forces that can outlast hardship. It reminds us that hope doesn't fade with age, it deepens through experience.